Hello and welcome then to Chapter 22 of RWR Plays TEW 2020. This is WCW Lives On, where we are controlling WCW as Eric Bischoff in this alternative timeline where Fusion Media Ventures bought the company as opposed to WWE in April of 2001. And we are now well into the game. We're up to September, the first week of September of 2001. We are not long off Slamboree. We've had one episode of Nitro since then. These are the results from that particular show. The main event, of course, saw Sting defeat Rick Steiner. We also had the Jarrett administration defeat Booker T and the European Union in a six-man tag match. And it was also revealed after that match that there's a clause in the contract from the match that took place at Slamboree between Jarrett and Booker T over the WCW title, which said that if Booker T lost the match by disqualification or count out, that Jeff Jarrett would be entitled to a rematch. And so that rematch will take place on next week's episode of Nitro. On this week's episode of Nitro, though, we also got made a match between DDP and Kevin Nash after their issues the night before on Slamboree, when Kevin Nash walked out on DDP when they were facing Totally Buff for the WCW tag team titles. DDP confronted Kevin Nash and they agreed to a match this week on Nitro. So that's what we've got in store for you today. Before we get to that, a little nudge in the direction of the subscribe button if you've been enjoying the series and want to continue to follow along. Click that button and you'll be up to date with us with everything new that comes out. So without further ado, let's get to Nitro for this week. So we're at the Fresno Convention Center in California for this particular show. Our dark match for the night sees Rick Steiner take on Alex Wright and win in 7 minutes and 44 seconds by pinfall with a segment rating of 65. This was pretty decent because Rick Steiner has got a pretty good level of popularity despite being on the receiving end of some losses as of late. But he gets the victory here over Alex Wright. A pretty decent contest between two guys that just weren't on the show anywhere else. Going into the show proper then, Nitro. This is just after the opening show titles. Tony Schiavone is stood backstage and he welcomes us to the show and he runs down the card for the night, including the massive match that was agreed last week as tag team partners DDP and Kevin Nash of the Insiders will face one another to settle some of their recent differences. Tony also talks about the tag titles being on the line as Totally Buff face the challenge of Sean O'Haire and Chuck Palumbo tonight, and he says that to start tonight's show, he has the challengers with him now. So this little introductory bit gave here a segment rating of 47, and then Tony Schiavone speaks to Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Haire. Schiavone says that tonight is their third match against Totally Buff since May, the first being the occasion when they lost the tag team titles to Lex Luger and Buff Bagwell at the Big Bang. Schiavone asks them whether tonight is make or break. Chuck Palumbo says they know that this is realistically their last chance to win the belts back. They know second chances are rare and tonight they have to take full advantage of the one they've been given. Sean O'Haire also adds that they are focused and determined to get the job done. So segment rating here 55 as we hype up Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Haire's latest challenge for the tag team titles held by Totally Buff. The next match is a pretty unimportant singles match here. Conan defeating the Wall in 7 minutes and 29 seconds. Segment rating of 58. Conan had an in-ring performance of 64. The Wall, who we still haven't really found anything to do, and he pretty much just plays a jobber role at this point, had an in-ring performance of 29. In the next segment, we get Tony Schiavone introducing his latest guest, a man named Don Callis, who is a pro wrestling agent who has been working with WCW and a number of organizations in Japan to bring the best wrestlers from the Orient to the company. Schiavone asks Callis how he thinks the stars of Japan will compete with the top wrestlers in WCW. Callis says that the men he intends to bring in are the best talent anywhere in the world not currently working for WCW. He says that they are going to prove a massive threat to all of the top stars. Schiavone asks whether Callis seriously believes that there are men out there who could challenge the likes of Sting, Booker T, Bill Goldberg and Scott Steiner. Callis says not only does he believe that, but says he will also make a bold prediction that one of the men he brings to North America in the not too distant future will be a WCW World Champion by the end of 2002. Callis says that it could even be this man, at which point a wrestler walks into view. Callis introduces him as Toshiaki Kawada, perhaps the finest wrestler not just in Japan, but in the entire world, and the American audience was just about to find out how good this man really was. The show then went to break ahead of Kawada's debut in the company coming up afterwards. So a segment rating here of only 40, and obviously we've introduced Don Callis and Toshiaki Kawada here in this segment. Not a particularly high rated segment, but yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes. Interestingly, I put in Mike Tenay, not Tony Schiavone there, so they obviously made a bit of a mistake, but it didn't make much of a difference, I don't think. So after the break, we come back with Toshiaki Kawada versus Ernest Miller, and Kawada wins in 6 minutes and 23 seconds by pinfall. And you can see here already an amazing in-ring performance from Kawada, 61, Ernest Miller, 43. That's despite Kawada's popularity in the US not being anywhere near what it is in Japan. A segment rating of 60, got to be happy with that for Toshiaki Kawada's debut in the company. And this is obviously the latest sort of product of our talent trading a deal with All Japan Pro Wrestling. I have got to be honest, I had to give back to them, I think, Scott Steiner. So basically we've got Toshiaki Kawada for a few dates, and they're going to have Scott Steiner for a few dates, but the intention is to keep bringing Kawada in because I wanted somebody from Japan who was a big star but also a really good wrestler who we could start to sort of bring in and build up in a quite a quick fashion to take advantage of their overall quality and just sort of have a really good, almost instant top tier type guy. So Kawada comes in, and a really good start for him here. Next up, Scott Steiner is introduced by Tony Schiavone, who's now in the ring, and Scott Steiner joins him. Schiavone asks Steiner how he's feeling about the upcoming Lethal Lottery. Steiner says that he shouldn't even have to compete in the Lethal Lottery. A title shot should be his by right. Schiavone says that Eric Bischoff has previously explained that automatic rematches are no longer granted to former champions. Steiner says that that's very convenient for Booker T because that's the only reason he still has the title. He says Booker T has hidden behind Eric Bischoff for months, and now he's even hiding behind Jeff Jarrett's lawyer to avoid facing him. Steiner says that Booker T should just come out and admit that he doesn't want a piece of Big Papa Pump. So a segment rating here of 78. Schiavone airing his grievances about not getting a title shot to this point, and also talking about the fact that he's going to be in the Lethal Lottery in 3 weeks' time. You can see here Steiner was really good, but Tony Schiavone not so great. Straight after this, Booker T comes out and confronts Scott Steiner. He says that Steiner knows perfectly well that he's done everything he can to lobby for him to get a title shot. He then says it doesn't matter anymore anyway, because in a couple of weeks' time, it will be entirely in Steiner's control to earn his title shot by winning the Lethal Lottery. Steiner tells Booker T that if that's what he wants to try and convince all these people, then that's fine, but we both know better than that. Steiner says that Booker T has been ducking him ever since WCW relaunched, and not even the career-ending beating that he handed out to Booker's own brother can make Booker want to get in the ring with him. At that, Booker T charges Scott Steiner and the pair brawl, firstly in the ring before it spills to the outside and up the ramp as officials try to break them up. So a brilliant segment here of 91, Steiner coming across really well, and the Booker T and Steiner kind of feud that's been on and off since the beginning of the relaunch of the company continues with this particular segment. In the next match, in a decent match, Kidman and Rey Mysterio Jr. defeated Elix Skipper and Kid Romeo in 8 minutes and 15 seconds when Billy Kidman pinned Elix Skipper. Rey Mysterio Jr. was head and shoulders above everyone else as per usual, and Kid Romeo was the weak link. A segment rating here of 61, but look at Rey Mysterio Jr.'s in-ring performance, an 85. That is truly fantastic. Billy Kidman a 67, which isn't bad either, but Kid Romeo and Elix Skipper trailing behind somewhat. Next up, Shane Douglas walks to the ring and says he has requested and been granted some TV time tonight to get some things straight. He says that things have been going off the rails for him recently, but he intends to turn them around beginning this evening. He says he is issuing an open challenge to anybody in the back to face him right here, right now. And he says that as part of requesting this time, he has had to promise that Chronic will not appear at ringside. A few moments pass before Tommy Dreamer emerges from the curtain to take up the challenge. We have a segment rating here of 58, and Shane Douglas was pretty decent in this particular segment. Again, he's sort of been a bit up and down in some of his performances, but this was better from him. The two then have their match. Shane Douglas wins it in 11 minutes and 30 seconds by pinfall with a handful of tights, and the segment rating is of 58. Shane Douglas, an in-ring performance of 62, and Tommy Dreamer of 58. Much better from Shane Douglas in relation to some of his recent performances, and Tommy Dreamer wasn't bad either, and Douglas gets the victory here. Next, backstage, Sharmell Sullivan introduces her guest for an interview, the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. Sullivan says that just over a month ago, Flair said he had one last big run in him. She asks how Flair feels this is going so far. Flair says that he admits he suffered a little setback at Slamboree, but that is in the past, and now he's just looking forward. He says in 3 weeks, it's the lethal lottery, and the winner gets a title shot at Halloween Havoc. Flair says that he can visualize it now. Ric Flair, the Nature Boy, challenging for the WCW title at Halloween Havoc, just like he's done many times before. Sullivan asks Flair how hard he thinks it'll be to accomplish. Flair says that it will be the hardest thing in the world because there will be 31 other guys thinking exactly the same thing as him. But what they need to realise is it will take them going through hell to beat him. So a segment rating here of 64, and Ric Flair just laying out his intentions to enter and win the lethal lottery. Sharmell Sullivan not particularly great in this one. Ric Flair improvised well. I'm going to stick with Sharmell Sullivan in this role for the time being. I think she's doing okay, if not spectacular. The next match sees the tag team titles on the line, and during this one, Jester comes to the ring and distracts both Sean O'Haire and the referee, and in the meantime, Vampiro enters through the crowd and hits Palumbo with a steel chair, allowing Buff Bagwell to get the easy pinfall and retain the titles for Totally Buff. The match went for 16 minutes and 1 seconds, and Totally Buff make their 4th defense of the WCW World Tag Team titles. A segment rating here of 69. Buff Bagwell carried the match in terms of in-ring performance, and you can see he got an in-ring performance of 71. He has been improving pretty much constantly throughout this save so far, so that's a really interesting development. Everyone else around about the 50-55 mark, so nothing's too spectacular there, but segment rating of 69, pretty decent. And of course, this continued the Gothic Collective and Sean O'Haire and Chuck Palumbo's feud. After the match, both Sean O'Haire and Chuck Palumbo look dejected after their loss, and O'Haire walks out without Palumbo as O'Haire looks frustrated. So segment rating here of 60. Chuck Palumbo did a really good job of improvising interactions with the crowd, but Sean O'Haire did not do so well. But the segment rating was still good, and we're just teasing a little bit of discord between Sean O'Haire and Chuck Palumbo with this particular segment. After this, we have Tony Schiavone speaking to Jeff Jarrett backstage. Schiavone says that we're just 7 days away from Jeff Jarrett's rematch against WCW World Champion Booker T on next week's Nitro for the title, and asks where his head is at this time. Jarrett says his head has never been clearer. Next week he will become a 5-time WCW World Champion. Schiavone says that Jarrett seems very confident and asks if there is a risk that becomes overconfidence. Jarrett says if there's confidence, it's because he's never been more focused on anything in his life, and in the meantime, Booker T is getting involved in crazy brawls out here in front of everyone with Scott Steiner. Jarrett says Booker T is distracted and unfocused, hardly the characteristics of a champion, but not to worry because a new champion will be crowned next week. So a pretty decent segment here, 52. Schiavone and Jarrett did well, and John Cena and Mike Sanders obviously just stood in the background supporting Jarrett. And that all leads to our main event of the evening, which sees Diamond Dallas Page versus Kevin Nash in a match that went 16 minutes and 35 seconds and saw Diamond Dallas Page get the victory by pinfall, a segment rating of 69, DDP an in-ring performance of 65, and Kevin Nash a 68. Not quite as good as I'd hoped this match, but still pretty decent and certainly good enough for what I needed to ensure that Nitro did a positive overall score. Straight after the match, Kevin Nash is frustrated and gets in referee Billy Silverman's face before eventually shoving the referee down. DDP then gets in Nash's face, shouting at him and asking, "What is wrong with you?" Nash turns away as if to cool himself down, but then twists around and clotheslines DDP before hitting him with a pair of powerbombs and leaving the destruction in his wake as Nitro goes off the air. So segment rating of 62. Dallas Page and Kevin Nash did pretty well in the segment. Billy Silverman didn't do so great in terms of selling the effects of Kevin Nash's shove. And that also is the proper now heel turn of Kevin Nash, which was a complete success. Kevin Nash's attack DDP turned on his former friend officially. Obviously, previous to this, it was just he'd walked out on him, and this time Kevin Nash attacked DDP, and he is now on the heel side of the aisle officially. And that is the end of the show. And an overall rating of 74 is actually much better than I imagined, given that we didn't have, given our main event was only 69. But maybe that's largely down to the excellent confrontation between Booker T and Scott Steiner as they make their way seemingly towards some kind of confrontation in the ring. But of course, we've been waiting for that since the beginning of the relaunch, all the way back in May. So who knows at this point? We also saw Shane Douglas issue an open challenge and Tommy Dreamer answer it, but Shane Douglas got the victory. Meanwhile, Sean O'Haire and Chuck Palumbo failed to win the WCW World Tag Team titles back for the second time of asking, and Totally Buff held on to the tag team belts, and that led to perhaps some discord, some ill feeling between Sean O'Haire and Chuck Palumbo. We'll have to wait and see. We also saw, of course, the debut of Toshiaki Kawada in WCW, and he actually had a really good match, a 60 rated match against Ernest Miller. So that's increased our popularity in all regions, and I have to be very, very pleased with that particular episode of Nitro. We move on to WCW Saturday Night next. So on to WCW Saturday Night then, and you can see the attendance for the overall TV taping is 2,370 people, so that continues to be getting healthier and healthier in terms of our attendances at our weekly shows. And the episode of Saturday Night begins with another match in the Hot Prospects tournament as Bobby Roode defeats Afa Jr. in 7 minutes and 57 seconds by pinfall while using the ropes for leverage. A segment rating here of 15. That was largely because the crowd were unhappy about the fact that they had a match with two wrestlers that they didn't really know anything about. And Bobby Roode had an in-ring performance of 26 and Afa Jr. just a 9. Bobby Roode gets the victory and progresses. And he progresses to a match where he will face Teddy Hart in a week's time in the semi-final. In match number 2, we see Naohiro Hoshikawa and Ryu Saito versus Chaos Theory in a tag team contest. This had terrible wrestling and non-existing crowd heat. Chaos Theory defeated Hoshikawa and Saito in 9 minutes and 19 seconds when Whipwreck pinned Hoshikawa. Segment rating of 31 here. Saito was a 41. Whipwreck a 46 and Tajiri a 41. Hoshikawa a bit less impressive. Again, another match with a lot of lower level wrestlers in, and I think, as I said, on the last episode of Saturday Night, that's going to continue to be the case as we go through, especially this month when we've got this Hot Prospects tournament going on. Backstage, Sharmell Sullivan interviews Bobby Roode following his victory earlier in the night, and she congratulates him on that victory. She asks Bobby Roode whether he has an advantage ahead of his semi-final with Teddy Hart after what happened to Teddy Hart on last week's show at the hands of Nick Gage. Bobby Roode says that Teddy Hart was probably seeing stars after the chair shot Gage delivered to him last week, and next week he'll be seeing a star of a different kind on his way to the final. So segment rating here of 24, not so bad. Bobby Roode did pretty well. Sharmell Sullivan wasn't so great. And hopefully Bobby Roode's victory and then this little interview segment will be enough to sort of kick Bobby Roode into a gear where more of the fans will be interested in seeing him in that semi-final contest that he's got next week against Teddy Hart. In the next quarterfinal of the Hot Prospects tournaments, Mike Knox defeated Chris Cage in 7 minutes and 21 seconds by pinfall. It's got a segment rating of 17, so better than the earlier match, and Mike Knox a rating of 28. That's pretty good from Knox. Chris Cage just a 14. And again, crowd just not happy with the fact that there's two more people they don't recognise in matches against one another. Before we get to the next match, we have a backstage interview, and it's Nick Gage joining Sharmell Sullivan. Nick Gage obviously had lost his quarterfinal match in the Hot Prospects tournament last week when he hit Teddy Hart with a steel chair in front of the referee. Sharmell Sullivan asks Gage what happened last week. Gage says that he hadn't realised WCW was for small boys. He was under the impression this was where men came to fight. Sullivan says that some would say men come to fight with their bare hands instead of metal weapons. Gage says that all his heroes never worried about using whatever they could to get their hands on. Guys like Terry Funk or Tommy Dreamer, who he grew up watching, never worried about swinging a chair or two. Sharmell Sullivan then thanks Gage for his time as the interview ends. So second rating here of 31, Nick Gage did pretty well, I would suggest, given that this was a 31, and Sharmell Sullivan didn't do so well in segment. So I'm relatively happy about this. The point of this really was to start to give some of these guys that we've brought in as part of this Hot Prospects tournament just a little bit of something to start thinking about going forward. Like, I'm not saying we'll use all of them or even most of them for the long run, but you know, the idea here is to maybe pick 2 or 3 out of this tournament that can do something going on forward into the, you know, the rest of the year beyond the tournament and so on. So Nick Gage is a good candidate for that, but just simply because he's quite a lot different to everybody else. So I thought we'd see what he did here, and this was not a bad start. So the next match is in the women's title round robin between Angel Orsini and Ronnie Stevens, and in 7 minutes and 4 seconds Orsini gets the victory by pinfall. A segment rating here of 15. Orsini was a 25, Stevens a 14. They didn't seem to click and it made for an awkward bout, and Ronnie Stevens was off her game, plus they had the additional kind of bad mark for the fact that nobody cared about the 2 wrestlers. So to get a segment rating of 15 is actually not bad at all. And Angel Orsini gets the victory in this one. And then the main event of Saturday night this week is Bobby Eaton versus Lance Storm, which Lance Storm wins in 13 minutes and 7 seconds by submission. Only a segment rating here of 51. I believe the match that they had, which was a dark match about a month ago, was a good 10 points better than this. So a disappointing rating. You can see Lance Storm was actually off his game during this match, and it was also noted that Stevie Ray's commentary was weak during this match, so a bit of a disappointment. But whatever the case, Lance Storm has gotten a victory over Bobby Eaton, and after the match he accepts the challenge that Kurt Hennig put down to him the week before, to a match where there would be no time limit and no interference, and that got a segment rating of 59 to end the show. So that was Saturday night, mainly featuring matches involving near unknowns. But the thing is, we've got Saturday night on such a small network that it doesn't matter. And again, it's a B show, so it doesn't really make any difference, you know, what the end of the quality of the show is. So this is just a really good opportunity for just to bleed as many of these youngsters as I possibly can and see if any of them, you know, we can bring any of them through. So an overall rating of 45, not that it makes much difference. We've introduced 1 or 2 things with Bobby Roode and Nick Gage this week. I didn't feel like we did enough work on the first week of the Hot Prospect tournament to make people kind of familiar with the individuals. But now we know the semi-final lineup, which will see Mike Knox face the Amazing Red and Bobby Roode take on Teddy Hart. And so that is the TV taping for this week. A pretty decent show Nitro was, and of course next week we've got the big WCW World Title match between Jeff Jarrett and Booker T coming up. Some of these bigger matches are happening on Nitro this month because at the end of the month we've got the Lethal Lottery, which is obviously a gimmicky pay-per-view, but we've got 2 nights of that gimmicky pay-per-view, so I hope that it does hold interest, and of course the winner of that Lethal Lottery becomes the #1 contender to the world title and will face the world champion at Halloween Havoc. So that is just about everything we need to do this week. Thank you once again for those of you who've tuned in. Again, if you like this video, please give it a like, and also you know, subscribe and kind of continue to follow along with the series. If you've got any predictions for things that are going to come up, or any suggestions for things I could do from a booking perspective, or just general comments, leave a comment below as well. I've always like to see that, and I do my best to respond to everything that comes in. But until the next video, which will hopefully be in another 4 or 5 days, thank you for watching.